All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon to all of our friends out on the East Coast, and good morning to our friends out on the West Coast. I'm Jarrett Smith. I'm the SVP of Strategy at Echo Delta, and I'm joined today by Grant DeRue, founder and principal at ADV Market Research. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to be here. We're going to do our very best to start on time and end on time. Some quick housekeeping. If you haven't already downloaded our full 50-page report, encourage you to do that. We're going to be covering some highlights from that report today, but we certainly won't have time to cover everything. So if you haven't already grabbed a copy, please head over to echodelta.co/politics and pick up one. Now, let's just get a quick preview of what's ahead today. We will start with some very brief introductions, give you a little background on the research that we conducted, and then we're going to spend our time exploring what Grant and I believe are sort of the most important findings from our research. And most importantly, I think, spend some time giving you some ways to consider applying those findings at your institution. Our goal is to do all of that in 45 minutes. It's a tall order, but we're going to do our very best. And we're going to try and reserve about 15 minutes at the end to answer Q&A so we can wrap up on time. Speaking of Q&A, thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions in advance. We will make sure to get to those questions first. But if you didn't submit questions, I really encourage you, please make use of that Zoom Q&A feature that you have available to you. And as questions occur to you, thoughts, reflections, please drop those in Q&A. We'll save them all for the end just for efficiency's sake, but we'll do our best to answer any questions that come up. After the webinar, please be on the lookout, of course, for an email from Echo Delta with the webinar recording and our slide deck. And so with that, Grant, let's jump into introductions. I've been doing all the talking so far. As my kids would say, I've been doing all the yapping. So why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Grant DeRue. I'm the founder and principal of ADV Market Research and Consulting, and we conduct market research for colleges and universities around the country. Like probably some of the people on the call, I got my start in higher ed as a tour guide when I was in college and worked in admissions at my alma mater at Elon University, and then worked in higher education market research for the last decade plus. And so it's a pleasure to be with you all today, pleasure to be able to share the results of this research as well as other research that we've pulled in from a variety of sources on this very timely topic. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Grant. And as I said, I'm Jarrett Smith, SVP of Strategy and also a partner here at Echo Delta. I also happen to host our agency's podcast, the Higher Ed Marketing Lab. If you're not yet familiar with Echo Delta, we are a full-service marketing and enrollment consulting firm. So our work spans traditional agency services like brand and web and media, but we also provide a lot of hands-on consulting, specifically campus visit consulting, strategic enrollment planning. And most recently, we launched sales training for admissions counselors, which has been a big hit and a lot of fun to deliver this year. If any of those things are relevant to a challenge you're facing today, please head over to echodelta.co to find out more. All right. Well, I think that's probably enough for introductions. Let's get into the meat of what we're here to talk about today. So I think we can all agree that politics has probably infiltrated nearly every aspect of American life. I always considered ice cream to be, oh, I am not sharing my screen. And my help just reminded me of that. You all are probably wondering, like, what's going on? Sorry about that. Okay. And here we are. Okay. I'm sharing my screen. Thank you so much. All right. So I think we can all agree that politics has infiltrated nearly every aspect of American life. I always considered ice cream, my beloved mint chocolate chip, to be relatively neutral ground, but even that hasn't escaped the long reach of American politics. And of course, we know concerns about the influence of politics in higher education, they are not new, whether we're talking about the influence of donors, the influence over curriculum, or something like DEI. These concerns are many and varied and been around for quite some time. But it does seem that in the past year or so, we've started to see something a bit new. And that is that it does seem now that politics is playing a much greater role in where students ultimately choose to go to college than perhaps it has in the past. Now, this first came to my mind through my colleague, Jeff Calais. Jeff heads up our campus visit consulting practice, and he probably spends more time on campuses around the country than any other person I know. And as a result of that, his constant conversations with admission and enrollment leaders around the country, and frankly, his observations of students and their families out on tours, he last year started coming to us and saying, as I'm talking with leaders around the country, a lot of them are saying that they are suspect that either state or campus politics are starting to play a greater role in where students are choosing to go to college. And this all came to a head for us in fairly dramatic fashion when one of our clients located here in the South said that they were able to point to no less than 50 individual students who explicitly said, "Hey, I like your school, but I'm not going to attend because of your state's politics." So, with that, that of course made us sit up and take notice. We realized we need to do something to try and understand this phenomenon a bit better and to try and wrap our brains around it. So, with that, we decided to launch some original research. I reached out to Grant, who we've brought in on many client projects for our agency, to help us design the study and field it. And so, Grant, I know we've got some sophisticated consumers of research. I'm wondering if you could just give us some quick highlights on our methodology.
Yes. So we surveyed over 1,000 future college students here throughout the country. Specifically, we were targeting that traditional age population, 16 to 18 years old, planning to attend college within the next 3 years. And we specifically targeted those who intend to enroll at a four-year college. Part of the question around politics and its role on college choice is is students by nature need to be somewhat mobile, right, in the colleges that they're considering in order for politics to even be a factor. And so we wanted students who were looking at four-year colleges for that mobility. We conducted this survey in February of this year, and the sample was constructed in such a way that it was representative by geography, gender, race, household income, and a couple of other demographic factors.
Great. Thank you, Grant. Okay, so let's dive into some highlights from our research. So, one of our first goals was just to establish sort of the lay of the land when it comes to students' politics. And some questions we had were, to what extent do students have strong political affiliations? How politically active are they? And are there any demographic factors that are highly correlated with students' politics? So, in general, if I had to characterize the politics of today's college bound students, I would say they are largely centrist in their views. 50% identify as moderate, 29% describe their politics as liberal, and 20% describe them as conservative. And this is actually fairly consistent with other recent research that shows that Gen Z teens are significantly more centrist in their political affiliation than Gen Z adults. Now, we were curious if there are any demographic factors that correlated strongly or seemed to predict students' politics, and we found two that really stood out above the rest. The first was race and ethnicity. So here you see students and their political affiliations, but broken out by race and ethnicity. And in blue, as you will see throughout our slides today, in blue, we are representing our liberal students. In red, we're representing our conservative students. Gray represents our moderate students. And what we see is that as a group, our white students tend to be more politically polarized than any other group. This is especially true when compared to our Black students or our Hispanic and Latino students. We also want to note that our Asian students have the highest proportion of students that would describe themselves as liberal, in all 36%. None of the Asian students that we surveyed would describe their politics as extremely conservative. We also found that sexual orientation was strongly correlated with political viewpoint. Across all students, we found that 29% of our respondents identified as LGBTQ. And when you break this out by political affiliation, you see some pretty big differences. For our liberal students, in all, 52% identify as LGBTQ, compared to 23% of our moderate students and 9% of our conservative students. And this is relevant, I think, because later on in the presentation, when Grant shares some of the specific concerns that students have, you will see that a number of them are related specifically to this. Now, we also wanted to understand how politically active today's students are. So, in our survey, we asked students what kinds of activities they had participated in within the last year. Everything from watching politically focused content online to attending a political meeting. In the graph, you see a series of dots. So this is showing you broken out by political affiliation. In light blue, you see how students answered overall. But of course, in blue, we see our liberal students. And what you'll note, just as a quick glance at this chart, is that overall, we do find that our left-leaning students are more politically active in general and are specifically significantly more likely to have done something like listened to or signed a petition, shared political content on social media, or participated in political discussions online. Now, there's been a good bit of commentary over the last year or so about a growing gender gap in Gen Z's politics. And now, of course, most of that is centered on Gen Z voters. So we were curious to see if any of that was reflected a bit in our analysis of college-bound students. And what we found actually is that, yes, our results are consistent largely with the discourse that's happening right now, in that we do see some gender differences across political affiliation. This is particularly evident when we look at our most politically active students. So our students who on that list of political activities had participated in 5 or more activities. And what we see is that the majority of conservative students, 56% in all, are male, while the majority of liberal students, our most politically active liberal students, have a strong majority of females at 71%. Now, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant, who is going to dive into ways that we see politics actually influencing student choice.
Thank you. And we wanted to think about this question in 2 ways, because we see 2 different ways that politics can impact a student's perceptions of an institution and its regional environment. The first are the politics of the college or university itself, right? So do they have a clear ideological lean? The second is the politics of the state where that college is located. And we wanted to separate those 2 as much as we could to understand how each of those impacts student choice. And we started first with a question of prospective students about how much they believe the political climate of a college affects its learning environment. And what you see here is that over half, 52%, feel that there is, in fact, some influence in the learning environment from an institution's political climate, meaning that in their view, there cannot be a clear separation of a college's political leanings and what happens in the classroom, more or less. And bear in mind, again, these are prospective students, right? They are 1 to 3 years out from setting foot on a college campus. And these are their perceptions of how politics might influence that student experience. And we have data from faculty that show that, those prospective students might be right. They might be right on target with their perceptions. What you see here is a survey of faculty members in select southern states, and they were asked, in response to changes in tenure, contracts, and academic freedom, would they encourage a graduate student or faculty colleague in another state to seek employment in their current state? Remarkably here, you can see that 86% of faculty members in Florida say no. Nearly 2/3 in Georgia and Texas say no, 58% in North Carolina. So faculty members themselves are sort of dissuading colleagues from considering employment in their states based on the impact of politics on institutional policies and decisions. And while we don't have corresponding data for what faculty members would say to prospective students, you can sort of read between the lines here and say that they would likewise probably discourage at least some prospective students from considering their own institutions or institutions in their state as a result of politics. So there's certainly some validation here to this. Then we wanted to get at this more directly. So we asked prospective students, if the political climate of the state where a college is located differed from your own political views, how would this impact your decision to attend? We asked a very related question around whether if the politics of the college differed from their own, how would that impact their decision? And what you can see here is for most students, politics and specifically diverging politics has at least a minor role in where they would go to college. Only 32% of students say that if the politics of the state differed from their own, it would have no impact on their decision, meaning 2/3 say that it's going to have some impact. And more specifically, 12% say that it would have a major impact, i.e., I would not attend that college if the politics of that state differed from my own political views. Now, 12% isn't a big share, but that equates to about 1 out of 8 students. And at a time when we know that demographics are shifting for college enrollments, when there's a lot of headwinds for enrollment managers and marketers, 1 in 8 students is significant. So certainly there is some role here to play. And we wanted to know as well, how does the importance of these things square up against other tried and true factors? We did something called a maximum difference scaling, or max diff. And basically the way that you can think about this is that we basically gave prospective students 100 pennies and set up 8 cups in front of them. And they could put those 100 pennies in those cups according to how important they are. Each of those cups corresponding to one of the segments of this chart that you see: cost, location, student life, etc. The upshot is that the political views of the college and the political climate of the college's state together account for almost 20% share of importance of that decision. Nearly as important as student life or overall reputation or location. And while this isn't comprehensive of all the many variables that prospective students take into account when they decide on a college, it's at least showing that politics is not nothing, right? It certainly it has a role here, for some students, a prominent role in which colleges they would choose. And not just based on the political views of the college, but also the political climate of that state. And for more specific information on that, Jared's going to share some data about which states students would and would not consider.
So, as you might expect, the extent to which state politics matter can vary quite a bit based on the state. In our survey, we asked students, what states would you be concerned about attending college in based on that state's politics? Now, here on our map in red, you see the states most commonly identified by our conservative students. In blue, you see the states most identified by our liberal students. And, honestly, looking at this, probably nothing surprising here. Our conservative students are most concerned about California and New York. Our liberal students tend to be primarily concerned about states in the South and also some in the West and Midwest. Now, for me, this gets a little bit interesting when we look at the data in a slightly different way. So here, what we're looking at is every state where students indicated concern, and we're showing for each state uh, the results for students across all political affiliations. Now, a couple of things really leap out to me. First, you see that our left-leaning students in the dark blue dots, in general, they have much more concerns about many more states. And in fact, we found that they were probably 3 times more likely, if not more, to cite states than our moderate and conservative students. We also see that 3 states right up at the top, Texas, Alabama, and Florida, far and away, especially for our left-leaning students, are states of significant concern. When you look at Texas, a full 50% of liberal students say they have a concern about attending college in Texas because of its politics. But here's something interesting, I think a slightly more subtle point. Look at these 3 states and also look at the proportion of both moderate and conservative students who also expressed concerns about those states' politics. Depending on the state, you're looking at somewhere between 15 and 17% of moderate students and between 9 and 12% of conservative students, which really surprised me. But I think there's a couple of things you can take away from that. First, I think it tells us that students are not a monolith. Just because a student may describe their politics as conservative, it doesn't mean that they are aligned perfectly with the politics of every conservative state. The other thing I think it tells us is that probably there are a lot of students out there who just don't want divisive state politics to be part of their college experience, whatever their personal politics may be. And I think there is some interesting data around this. This is some data that was recently reported by the AP this past week, and it was looking at how adults in the US are beginning to become fatigued with political content. And specifically, they asked adults in the US, are you limiting your media consumption due to overload or fatigue? And the number one topic where people are, in fact, limiting their consumption is government and politics, and all 59% of US adults. So now we don't have this data also for our prospective students, but I have to believe that if the parents in the home are experiencing fatigue, our students are probably experiencing something quite similar. So now Grant has some interesting data around how students view politics in their home state. And so I'll turn it back to him to go over that.
When it comes to politics and mobility, politics can be a push factor or a pull factor, right? And so we wanted to know, as Jarrett mentioned, what's the impact of the political climate of a student's own state on where they'll go to college? Now, for over half, 55%, they say the politics of their own state has no impact on where they'll go to college. 31% say that they're more likely to stay in their state because of its political climate, while only 14% say that they're less likely to stay in state because of political climate. So it's pretty interesting here to see that more often than not, either politics doesn't have any impact on, or forgive me, one's own state politics does not have any impact, or it's more likely to keep them in state. And I think that there's two important contextual points around this data. The first is this probably speaks more to the general sort of siloization of our society and culture. People are more likely to live in places that align with their political views today than they were, say, 50 years ago. So that's already happened. The second is that we have to recognize that the ability to go out of state is also an opportunity. It's a signal of privilege, right? It's to be able to go out of state, you have to have the means to be able to even consider that. And so it's not surprising then that a relatively small share, about 1 in 7 students, say that they're less likely to stay in their state because of its political climate. It's partly just a matter of practicality and means to be able to go out of state. So a couple of interesting things here. The final point that we have on this is we really wanted to know what specifically are students' concerns about going to college in a state with a political climate that differs from their own views. And we understand that there might be discomfort there, but we really wanted to drill down on what are their concerns. As you look at this list, and your eyes kind of scan down these reasons, you'll see these 4 items at the very top that were selected most frequently overall. There's fear of discrimination or harassment, concerns, I feel like I wouldn't belong, concerns about my own personal safety, and then concerns about the impacts on my mental health and well-being. A lot of these can be wrapped up in feelings of belonging and safety. That's right there at the very top. Then we see a few more, you could say, more topic-related issues here. Concerns about state policies on diversity, equity, and inclusion, concerns about having access to needed healthcare, and concerns about state policies on LGBTQ issues. 2 final points on this. I thought that this, toward about 2/3 of the way down this list, this item, concerned about what it might mean about the students who go to that college. This was only selected by about 20% of students overall, but 34% of liberal-leaning students. And I thought this was a really interesting attribute because when students are looking at a college and they're evaluating its own politics and the politics of its state, they're also then making educated guesses or assumptions about the politics of the students who go there, right? And so they're wondering essentially, what does this mean about the students who go there? Will I fit in with that group? Again, kind of related to belonging. Final point I'll make on this is it's impossible to ignore those dark blue dots here, especially these dark blue diamonds indicating that these are statistically significant differences. And these show that these concerns tend to be far more prevalent among liberal-leaning students than moderate or conservatives. Now, we have an understanding of students' politics and the role that that plays in their decisions. We then wanted to know, where are students developing these perceptions around college and state politics? We're going to start with the latter, looking at where students develop their own impressions of the politics of the states where their colleges are located. You can see here that top information sources are social media and friends and family. 52% of prospective students said that they primarily got information about the political climate of different states from social media, which is pretty remarkable, in the grand scheme of the transition of media and news sources for today's prospective students. You can see that was selected almost twice as much as traditional news outlets, third most frequent here. Now, more focus on what we are invested in for this research is, where do students feel like they're getting their information from regarding the political climate of the colleges that they're considering? Nearly half of prospective students, 47%, said that they developed that idea or their impression from friends and family. So this is sort of that, in the concentric circles of influencers for prospective students, this is that first circle, right? Friends and family, they're shaping their worldview, they're shaping their views of the politics of the different colleges that they're looking at. Right after that comes college websites and visiting campus. And this is really interesting because Jarrett and I both spend a lot of time on college campuses. We take a lot of college tours. I've never been on a college campus or a college tour where somebody explicitly said, these are our political views as an institution, right? We encourage our students to vote this way and our faculty and staff vote this way. It's less about explicit statements around politics. Rather, our interpretation of this is that prospective students are picking up on signals or context clues about a college's ideological leanings or its overall perspective on the world, I guess you could say. We also see some other influencers here, high school counselors, teachers, social media, but we were really focused on this idea of the college websites and visiting campus as being the information sources that really shaped students' perspectives on college politics. And in our view, this can come up in the speakers that are invited to campus, the political figures or business leaders who are aligned with your institution. It could be the programs that you offer. It could be photography or messaging that's used. It exists in so many different ways. And for a few examples of that, Jared's going to show us a few examples of how this might live in actual college messaging and creative.
Great. So let's just kind of do a little interactive activity for a moment to experience firsthand how this can work. So I'm going to show you a couple of screenshots pulled directly from actual college websites. Here is the first one. So we have deliberately hidden the name of the institution, but I'm going to give you a moment just to digest the words and images. And as you do so, think about, what details do you notice? What associations does this image, or perhaps the words, what associations does that conjure in your mind? If you were trying to make an educated guess about the political climate of this institution, what might you assume just based on what you're seeing and reading here? Is this a red campus? Is it maybe a blue campus? Maybe a purple campus? Now, pause on that one and let's look at this one. What about this? What details do you notice? What associations come to mind? Now, we're intentionally only showing you a very limited amount of information. But if you had to make a guess about the politics of this institution, what might you assume if you were attempting to make an educated guess? And this is, of course, the words and images pulled from a select few websites, but Grant mentioned that something like your academic programs can convey a sense of the institution's political viewpoint. So here are two lists of academic programs pulled verbatim off two different college websites. So I'm going to give you a moment to just absorb the first list. And now let's look at the second one. What did you notice? Now, if you're like me, you may have noticed that that first list of academic programs has a number of what we might call identity-based programs. It also has words like justice or sustainability that for some students will likely sort of code as more liberal or left leaning language. The list on the right, with its Greek and rhetoric and classical education, that may not necessarily code as conservative, but it might translate into more of a traditional viewpoint on education. Now, I do want to be super clear. We are making absolutely no value judgment here. We're not saying whether this is right or wrong or beneficial or not. We simply want to point out that students are making sometimes a very superficial judgment of your institution that may or may not be correct. And it's driven by a lot of these little impressions that spark their own associations that they're bringing. And collectively, it sort of adds up to an overall sense of what the political environment on your campus might be. Now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We'll kind of wrap up on this point. Given the nature of political discourse today and how we're watching that play out on campuses, we absolutely could not pass up the opportunity to at least ask a couple of questions around freedom of speech and campus neutrality on political issues. So we had two questions in our survey directly related to this. The first question around free expression went like this: which of the following statements do you agree with more? It's important for all voices to be heard, even if it offends others, or it's important to limit speech that might be offensive to others. Now, up at the top, we see our overall results. In all, 77% of students, the majority, agreed with that first statement that it's important for all voices to be heard. And then below that, you see how the results break out based on both political affiliation and also by level of political activity. And I have to admit, this was an area where we were a little bit surprised. What we found in our survey was that really there weren't many significant differences across political affiliation. We thought we might see more, but we didn't. And in other questions in our survey that touched on freedom of speech, we actually found that freedom of speech was probably the one issue that students of all political stripes were the most aligned on overall. We also see some differences based on political activity, but not much. Just in general, there seems to be a trend that the higher the level of political activity, the more students were likely to support all voices being heard. Now, we asked a similar question around campus neutrality, around political issues. Which of the following statements do you agree with more? Colleges should remain neutral on political issues, or colleges should take a clear stand on political issues. And here also, you see the overall results up top. In all, a strong majority, 73%, agreed with that first statement, that it is important that colleges should remain neutral on political issues. And then below, you see a breakout for political affiliation and political activity. And what we do note here is that our left-leaning students are a bit more likely to expect or want the institution to take a stand on political issues. And then we definitely see a strong correlation with political activity, in that the more politically active a student is, the more likely they are to want an institution to take a stand on political issues. But I would note that even among our students with the highest level of political activity, still there is a majority, 55%, say that they would prefer their institutions to remain neutral. Now, with this, we shared some of the highlights, what we thought were some of the most interesting and important findings from our research. Now we're going to turn our attention to, what do you actually do with this? How can you apply some of these findings in your research? And for that, I'll turn it over to Grant to kick it off.
I think part of the challenge whenever we talk about politics and its role on influencing student choice is that it can feel so out of your hands, right? So existential. And so we wanted to provide a few practical steps and implications for institutions. And starting with recognizing the importance that politics does play in student choice and in the colleges that they're considering. We now have a better understanding from this research of the frame of mind that students are approaching the college search process with. And in response to that, it behooves institutions to proactively not only understand that, but address it actually in communicating with prospective students. And I think one example of what that might look like is, and Jarrett, you can advance just a little bit here. Thank you. I think one example of what that might look like is preparing the admissions team, for instance, with a series of talking points around questions around the political environment of the state and the institution's stance, really, the institution's policies and establishing that feeling of belonging for all students, regardless of their political views on your campus. And so I remember being an admissions counselor, at 22, 23, and traveling in a different part of the country away from campus. And I'm thinking, for the teams that you manage and for you as individuals, having a clear policy in place or having those talking points be really beneficial for your counselors if and when they field these questions at a college fair, at a school visit, from a student, parent, high school counselor, whatever it may be. Second, leading with belonging, emphasizing the support services and the student organizations that you have at your institution, emphasizing an inclusive campus climate. Jarrett will show us a great example of that here in just a moment. And localizing to what you can control as well. I think this is really important. Whenever we have worked with institutions that feel like they are a red campus in a blue state, or more commonly, blue campus in a red state, trying to figure out, where do we draw the line in addressing statewide politics versus what we can control on our own campus? And I think as an institution, the response needs to be focused on more of the latter as you're talking with prospective students. It's what can they expect from their student experience at your college or university? And what's going to be the role or the impact of statewide politics on their actual student experience there? You saw the 4 concerns that students had earlier: discrimination, physical safety, mental well-being, and lack of feeling of belonging. The more that you can assure students of those 4 things at your institution, the better off you'll be in addressing this conversation. The third is taking an objective look at the signals that you send to prospective students and their families and anybody else who's reviewing your materials. What do we say about our own institutional politics, either in word or in visuals, that might send a signal, subtle or otherwise, about our own political alignment, and therefore who would feel like they belong here, who would feel comfortable here? And finally, while this research focused on prospective students, we can't ignore the importance of our own current students as well. We always say brand flows from the inside out. Well, the same thing would apply here in terms of responses to political issues or sort of reputation impacting types of policies or decisions. And so it's really important here as well to collect perspectives from your own current students about how the institution has responded to political issues in the past, what they expect or want of their own institutions going forward as well.
Great. Thanks, Grant. And so we wanted to take this a step further than we did in the original report and offer up a bit of a framework that you might consider using as you think about your own institution, the political context you're operating within, and the students that you hope to attract to your institution. I think, in my view, there are really sort of 2 strategic questions you need to try and answer. The first question is, how does your institution strive to be politically neutral, or does it endorse a specific ideological perspective? And I emphasize the word strive there. We're not going to debate whether it's possible to actually be politically neutral. We'll never end on time if we do that. But I think, what is the intent of the institution overall? And I think this is really about looking inward at the institution, at its stated mission, its stated values, the enduring identity of the institution. I think it should also involve looking at the deliberate operational or policy choices that the institution is making. For instance, does an institution have specific initiatives related to civil dialogue on campus, or specific efforts related to promoting a particular ideological stance? The second question I think you need to answer is, how subtle or overt do you want to be in terms of how you communicate where you land on that first question? And of course, whether you're subtle or overt, that needs to be aligned with your mission and the values of your organization. But I think this is really about looking outward from the institution and acknowledging the larger political context that you operate within and what your institution's goals are. Now, I realize this can be a little bit conceptual. What I would like to do is look at a handful of institutions to explore how this sort of plays out in the real world. And the first institution I want to look at is one that is probably the most associated with free expression and political neutrality, and that is the University of Chicago, which I believe I would describe their overall strategy as one of an overt neutrality, as evidenced by some of their admissions communications, right? U Chicago is consistent and explicit in how it communicates its goal of creating a politically neutral campus environment. For example, this is the first two-page spread in some promotional materials from their admission office. Now, right from the start, you look at that big bold headline, they are affirming their commitment to fearless inquiry. And then later in the body text, they very quickly bring up the notion of free expression on campus. And of course, I think strategically for U Chicago, this makes a ton of sense. They are an elite private institution, intellectual rigor, fearless inquiry that is core to their academic brand. And as you just saw, this stance aligns well with the values of most of today's students who support free speech and institutional neutrality. So I think by vigorously and consistently communicating this position, U Chicago really has an opportunity to stand out in sharper relief against institutions that may actually share very similar values, but just aren't as overt in the way that they communicate them. And we know that this not only is resonating with students and some faculty, but it also does resonate with donors. Just this last week, Inside Higher Ed reported that U Chicago received an anonymous $100 million gift to support the university's Forum for Free Inquiry and Expression, which I believe is probably the largest gift of its kind. Now, I have to note that this isn't just all upside for the University of Chicago, nor any institution that takes a strong, bold stand in any particular direction. And so even for the University of Chicago, taking a strong stand is going to invite criticism. And that is especially true among those who believe that the institution is not acting in congruence with its stated values. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. I'm in no way weighing in on whether U Chicago is living up to its stated values. That is not my job. I'm simply pointing out that when you take a bold stand, you will have critics. And so that's why I think it's so important that when you answer these strategic questions, you really guard against being overly aspirational in your answers. Of course, no institution is going to live up perfectly to its values. Someone will always find fault. But if you take a bold stance, it has to be firmly grounded in the reality of what exists on campus right now in terms of its culture and day-to-day operations. Now, U Chicago, I said, represents what I would call an overt neutral stance. Now I want to look at an institution that I believe is the classic example of an overt ideological stance and one that is executing very well, and that is Hillsdale College. Now, whatever you may think of Hillsdale College politics, if you're familiar with the institution, Hillsdale is, to my mind, one of the best examples of an institution that is successfully pursuing an overt ideological approach. In this case, for this institution, is one that is grounded in their Christian faith and their conservative politics. Now, again, going back to that idea of, is this authentic to the institution? It's important to note they are not chasing a trend. This is not new for Hillsdale. In the 1800s, they were an advocate for the abolition of slavery. In the 1970s, they gained some prominence for refusing to count students by race. And as a result, even today, no longer take federal funds because of that. And then more recently, you may have seen some of the free courses that they offer, taught by very serious men in dark suits with titles like The American Left, From Liberalism to Despotism. Now, if that's not a clear stance, I don't know what is. So clearly, taking stands on political issues is core to how they operate. And I think in this way, they're very similar to U Chicago, right? You have two institutions that are very publicly and unapologetically living out their values, and it differentiates them. It's given them a platform that resonates with students and donors and faculty who share those same views. This has absolutely been reflected in Hillsdale Hillsdale's enrollment trajectory. Over the last decade, they've seen a 53% increase in applications to the institution. They have a 62% yield rate and a 95% retention rate, and their selectivity has only gone up and up. So clearly, this is not resonating with everybody, but it's resonating with a segment of the population extremely well. Now, I realize you may sort of be looking at this. You're like, great, University of Chicago, Hillsdale, cool. That's great for them. That is not happening at my institution. And I want to acknowledge that and kind of end on something that I think is a more realistic approach for where most institutions want to end up most of the time. And that is in what I would describe as more of a neutral, subtle approach. And I think an example of an institution that may be pursuing that is Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M is a relatively conservative campus in a vocally conservative state. And so it was very interesting to us when we noted that back in 2022, they launched a campaign called Where You Belong. It's a series of 39 lighthearted, quirky, honestly, like super charming videos that are all housed on their Aggie Bound YouTube channel. So an admissions focused YouTube channel. Now, to be clear, I do not know what the original brief was. I don't actually know what their intent was. This is my opinion as an outsider looking in on the institution. But from what I can tell, this really appears to be designed to portray Texas A&M as a place where students with widely different backgrounds and vastly different interests can find their place. And I think it'll be much easier for me to show rather than tell. So this video is about a minute long, and we'll see if we can get it to play here.
So we're a cosplay club. Once you come onto campus, you're sure to find people that are like you and sure to find a home in a community.
Looking at these characters, I was like, I want to be like them. And then I learned about cosplay, and I'm like, I can't actually be them, but I can dress like them and feel like them.
When I started my first day here and went to my very first class, I met like a whole bunch of people that were from all across the country or even outside of the country.
The environment and like the welcoming atmosphere, I was just hooked.
The people here, the friendly faces, it's home, you know?
I'd like to show people, hey, you can be on campus, you can be different, you can be yourself, you should be yourself, because that's what makes campus beautiful. Gig 'em!
Oh, sorry, I did not want to replay that video. The whole series is worth checking out. It's really charming. But I think what's important here is that to me, this sort of represents a strategic compromise. On one hand, the campaign is conveying what I would describe as an attitude of inclusivity, but importantly, it never speaks the language of inclusion or diversity. And so that makes sense in a state like Texas that has actually banned the use of that language in a lot of cases. So I think this is allowing A&M to, potentially appeal to a broader base of students, potentially more liberal students, while avoiding controversy with more of their conservative stakeholders. Now, whether anyone at A&M would actually agree with that, I cannot say. This is my own opinion, but that is sort of my analysis as an outsider looking in. So with all that in mind, I want to leave you with just a couple of quick points. If I can get past this video slide here. It's very persistent. There we go. Couple of quick takeaways, and then we'll jump into some Q&A in the time that we have left. So as you think about answering these two strategic questions, how neutral or ideological does your institution seek to be? And how overt or subtle do you want to be in the way you communicate that stance? A couple of things to keep in mind. First, alignment with mission, values, and identity. The institutions we looked at, regardless of what their approach is, they know who they are and they are owning it. They are not chasing a trend. Second, I would say always look for operational receipts, especially if you think your institution has an opportunity to take a bolder, more overt stance out in the marketplace. So what I mean by that is look not just for differences in your stated mission, stated values, but also look for substantive differences in terms of policy or operations. Like the University of Chicago, they have a forum for free expression in inquiry. Do you have something like that that is either promoting perhaps neutrality or maybe promoting a specific ideological perspective? Third, I would say just realize that overt stances are, in fact, a double-edged sword. Institutions who take a strong stand absolutely can benefit from the differentiation that that creates, but it also does create a bit of a liability and invites criticisms, especially if you are seen to operate in a way that's inconsistent with your stated values. And then lastly, I would say don't be afraid to embrace a strategic compromise. I think as Texas A&M shows in their campaign, just because the language around something like DEI might be controversial, you can still at least convey a strong sense of diversity and inclusion. In fact, in some ways, at least in these videos, I think that actually leads to stronger storytelling. So with that, I know we've covered a lot. I hope you've have some questions that perhaps have popped up as we've gone along. We'll see if we can pull those up in just a moment. But in the meantime, I do want to answer questions from folks who submitted questions in advance. And Grant, I think this is a good question for you. Rachel asks, how does your research change what admissions teams actually say to prospects?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of go back to what I was saying earlier about having a departmental policy, or at least some preparation for this, and preparing admissions teams with talking points about the institution's political perspective and um, and the feeling of belonging that is fostered on campus. So I I think what this research has shown me, and probably what some of the people attending today have felt and experienced, is that questions around politics are not a matter of if, but when, amongst a lot of prospective students. And if we start from that perspective, then it makes sense to prepare our teams with responses to those questions in advance. And so to do something as a departmental leader to provide some talking points to the team around how they address those questions. And this is going to be different for every institution, right? To your point just a moment ago, there are 100 different ways to address this. But I think providing preparation for your teams based on the culture and policies of your institution is going to be the best response to this. So being proactive in that sense in preparing the team.
Great. Thanks, Grant. Okay, so Nathan asked, how does this impact the international student population? Are they even concerned? It's a great question. Certainly in our survey, unfortunately, we did not, it wasn't really the focus of our survey. Grant, I don't know if you've come across any data that might speak to that. I have not.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion around this, in the wake of 2016, right? There was a dip in international enrollments, and then the pandemic, and then things have been sort of recovering in the past couple of years since. I think that certainly the research has shown that there is feelings of concern among some international students depending on the outcome of the election. And, it's very clear which direction those concerns go in based on behavior following the 2016 election. I don't know that we have data from this survey or from any other sources that would be, new to those who have been paying attention to this question for international students. All I can say is it's been encouraging to see the recovery that's happened in international enrollments in recent years. And survey data shows that there's some concern among some segments of prospective international students.
Good deal. Thanks. And then David asked a great question. What suggestions or recommendations do you have for how academic and student affairs can contribute to attract right fit students? In other words, how can this be addressed beyond just messaging and marketing? I think that's a great question. I think that of course, a lot of what we talked about in the examples we showed are focusing on outward communications. But when we think about the academic side of the house, the student affairs side of the house, we are actually talking about the fiber, the people who are directly impacting the day-to-day culture and operations of the institution. And so, Grant, I think we were talking about this yesterday, kind of reviewing questions that have been submitted. You had a great way of putting it. You said that marketing is telling the story, but it's really academics and student affairs that is the story that they are trying to tell. What would you add to that?
Yeah. Related to that, brand is behavior, and it's about how an organization behaves. And so part of brand is political ideology, part of it is response to political ideology. And so we have to align our behavior as an organization with what we say to prospective students and their families. So what I mean by that, I think in terms of student affairs and actually faculty delivering the education that students are receiving, is that we have to align our behavior with what our university's stated policies are. And I realize that almost sounds like a platitude, but it really is, I think, the most important thing in response to this. We have to align our actions with our stated policies. And that starts then with the top, with clear administrative level decisions around how we as an organization are going to behave in response to political changes going on in our state, in the region, in the country. And then that needs to trickle down to the student experience. So if we say that we're belonging for all different political viewpoints, we need to ensure that we are delivering on that in the classroom and out of it, which is really the role of faculty and student affairs. And so it's just aligning that behavior.
Yeah. No, I think that's great, Grant. One thing that popped into my mind as you were kind of explaining that was that to me, it's the importance of, of course, aligning behavior and all of what you just said. And also, I think, prove it out, show it. There is a professor, I will point this out to folks. I think it's super interesting. There is a professor at Penn State. He runs the largest class on race and identity in the country. And he has a YouTube channel called SOC, SOC 119. I guess it's the name of the course. And it's a huge survey course. And if you go out on YouTube, you will see that this professor publishes a live stream of every lecture for the past several. So he's been doing this for years. He has 300,000 subscribers. Now, to be clear, I don't know how Penn State as an institution feels about this. I don't know whether I can't weigh in on that. But what is remarkable about that is that I think this professor is demonstrating that it is possible to talk across significant differences, and sort of demonstrates that highest ideal of challenging students, not telling them what to think, but really encouraging them to challenge their own thinking and to introduce a new perspective, and to show that it is possible to have conversations, meaningful, productive conversations around deeply complicated and deeply divisive issues. So I would check that out. And if you actually spend some time reading the comments of that are on these YouTube videos, what you will see is there are so many people from all different political persuasions. Sometimes they agree with what was said in class, sometimes they don't, but many people reiterate, thank you for having these conversations. And I think for a lot of folks, particularly of a conservative stripe who, Grant, we were talking just the other day, there's this trope about the liberal professor who's indoctrinating all of the students, right? This goes headlong into that and just sort of blows that out of the water. And in a way, at least to my mind, as a small college liberal arts grad, it's sort of what you would hope is happening in the typical classroom. And it sort of fills in that void, and sort of is an answer to that. So I think it's an example of how just even one faculty member can have a huge impact on how the institution is viewed. So good stuff. Well, folks, I know we are coming up on time. We said we would try and start on time and end on time. We are right at 2:00. Thank you again so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. If you haven't already gone out, one last time, if you haven't already gone out to download the full 50-page report, I encourage you to head over to echodelta.co/politics and grab your report. Thank you so much for being here, and be on the lookout for an email with our webinar recording and our slide deck. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you.